Even among notorious criminals, there are those who stand out for their particular cruelty and sadism. True monsters. Today's story is about such monsters in human form. Deborah Evans, or Debbie as her close ones called her, was born on May 6, 1967, in a deeply religious family in Chicago, Illinois, USA, where she was the eldest of 4 children. She was always a loud and cheerful girl, very mischievous. Despite her active and positive attitude towards life, she struggled with low self-esteem, which began to develop after her parents' divorce. Probably because of this, Debbie sought understanding but chose the wrong direction. She frequently interacted with and got involved with men much older than her, who likely reminded her of her father. Eventually, this led to an unintended pregnancy at the age of 18. On September 29, 1985, a girl was born, whom Debbie named Samantha. The young mother was happy and dedicated all her time and attention to her child. Meanwhile, the relationship between Debbie and the biological father of the child began to crack. She tried to keep the relationship intact, but it was all in vain. Soon, their relationship completely fell apart and the couple broke up. During this period, family members noticed a sharp decline in Debbie's self-esteem. This was linked to postpartum depression and the extra weight she had gained during pregnancy, from which she could not get rid of. Debbie was deeply insecure, but tried to find a new partner through various dating clubs. It only took a small sign of interest for Debbie to reciprocate. For many, her behavior might have seemed frivolous, but her friends and family believed she was on a quest to find happiness. She began relationships with several men at once. 3 years later, her second child, a boy named Joshua, was born. The boy had spinal issues which affected the development of his legs. He required frequent medical care, and from the first months of his life, he became a regular patient at the local medical center. Her relationship with the father of the boy did not work out, so Debbie could not rely on his help. The single mother lived on benefits and with the support of relatives, especially the father of her first child. In 1989, a 22-year-old woman started dating a 24-year-old man named James Edwards. The following 6 years of their relationship saw frequent breakups and reunions. The young man became an integral part of the little family's life, despite the occasional difficulties in understanding each other. Later, Debbie met a dark-skinned guy named Laverne Ward. She found herself torn between the new boyfriend, who was 4 years younger, and her longtime boyfriend, James. In 1994, Debbie gave birth to a son named Jordan. She believed that Laverne was the biological father of the child. The boy was dark-skinned, like Laverne. Despite this, Debbie couldn't fully commit to either of her boyfriends, continuing to bounce between them. During this time, she lived on benefits but actively tried to find a job. James was much more stable and serious than Laverne. He had a decent job and was actually able to support a family, so he was her priority. By the end of 1994, Debbie decided to move to a safer area of Illinois and chose an apartment on the western outskirts of the small town of Edison. She finally made up her mind and wanted to stay with James. During this period, their relationship became respectful and warm. Even Josh, who had congenital spinal problems, had recovered and become a healthy, quite athletic boy for his age. It seemed like life was getting back on track. By March 1995, James had moved in with his girlfriend. Unexpectedly, Debbie told her boyfriend that she was pregnant again. She wanted to name the future son Elijah. In November 1995, it was expected that within a few weeks, 28-year-old Debbie would be admitted to the hospital. She was in her 9th month of pregnancy and could give birth at any moment. It was expected that she would be admitted to the maternity ward on November 19th, and her labor would be induced on November 20th. No one suspected that Debbie wouldn't make it to the medical center, but the reason for her absence turned out to be even more terrifying. Around 5:30 p.m. on November 16, 1995, James left for work. It was nearby, so he didn't take the car. His shift ended at 2:30 a.m. When he returned home, he noticed a suspicious light in the room, although Debbie and the children were supposed to be asleep. This seemed strange to him, and he became cautious, thinking perhaps Debbie had gone into labor. As he got closer to the house, James became even more worried when he noticed that the front door was unlocked. He entered the house and immediately saw suspicious bloodstains in the kitchen. Little Jordan, covered in blood, came toward him. James quickly checked the child, and it seemed like he was fine. He called out to his girlfriend, but there was no answer. When James entered the bedroom, he saw her lying on the bed. Debbie was covered with a blanket and seemed unusual. She was clearly not asleep. James thought his girlfriend was playing a prank, pretending to be asleep as she had done before. However, when he gently pulled the blanket aside, he realized that things weren't as he had thought. 28-year-old Deborah was no longer showing any signs of life, and her abdomen was empty. In panic, James began calling the children's names, but no one answered except for Jordan. He ran to the room of 10-year-old Samantha and found her lying on the floor. The girl also showed no signs of life. There was a noticeable wound on her neck. He couldn't find 8-year-old Josh. James immediately called emergency services. When the police arrived at the scene, they found the young man next to Debbie. He looked confused and clearly didn't understand what was happening. He repeatedly asked the police and medical staff his loved ones were alive. He began to cry after receiving a negative answer. Forensics examined Debbie's body and found that her abdomen had been damaged, likely due to an unskilled procedure. The infant could not be found in the apartment. 1.5-year-old Jordan was covered in blood, but not because something had happened to him. He was likely stained after witnessing the tragic incident, possibly trying to help his mother and sister. It was unclear where 8-year-old Josh was. The police immediately began searching for the boy, first turning to the neighbors. While they were interviewing locals, forensics continued to examine the crime scene and the surrounding area. Large kitchen scissors, often used for cutting food, were found outside. They were covered in blood, which might indicate that they were used to cause the damage. During the search, several fingerprints were collected, which likely belonged to the perpetrators. It also became clear that the intruders had entered the house without breaking in, suggesting that Deborah knew the attackers and may have voluntarily let them inside. Detectives were dealing with a rare type of crime, as the criminal must have been closely monitoring the victim to know when it was the right moment to steal the infant. The first person brought in for questioning was the deceased's cohabitant, as well as the surviving child, whose blood was sampled for analysis. In such cases, it's usually the closest people involved. Therefore, it was necessary to verify James's involvement in the crime. When the victim's relatives were notified and arrived at the station to speak with the detectives, they all insisted that James was a great guy. They claimed that the couple had a loving relationship and were eagerly awaiting the expansion of their family. Therefore, he could not possibly be guilty of what had happened. From the start, James was very cooperative with the police. He provided all the necessary information and even volunteered to take a polygraph test. James wanted to be removed from the list of suspects as soon as possible so that the focus could shift to finding the real criminal. The family provided valuable information about Deborah's former boyfriend, Laverne Ward, who was the biological father of the surviving 1.5-year-old Jordan and also a member of a local gang. It became known that throughout their relationship, Laverne had repeatedly abused Deborah, locking her up and keeping her at home. She had tried several times to get a restraining order against him, but each time the manipulator managed to talk her out of it. However, shortly before the crime, she had finally succeeded in obtaining a restraining order. Deborah's sisters knew that the couple had broken up 7 to 8 months ago, which was the last time Laverne had been seen. Despite this, Laverne continued to appear in Deborah's life. The family didn't know all the details of their relationship, but Deborah's sisters mentioned that she continued to maintain a connection with Laverne's family, bringing 1.5-year-old Jordan to see them. Unfortunately, no one knew the Ward family well, except for one of Laverne's cousins, who was also pregnant at the time. Unfortunately, no one could remember the name of this girl. Deborah's current boyfriend, James, confirmed that his relationship with Laverne had been very aggressive and frightening. This was one of the reasons why Deborah was relieved to end it. However, due to their shared child, they still had to cross paths. During the search of the crime scene, several items were found that didn't belong to either James or Deborah. At the same time, several of James' personal belongings were missing. Some of the items were taken for examination. Neighbors helped confirm James's statements and provided valuable information about Laverne. James' alibi was confirmed by his employers and colleagues. James had indeed been at the sorting center the entire evening. However, the neighbors could not identify the attacker. They had not seen who had committed the crime. But one woman noticed a group of suspicious young people near the house in the evening hours, consisting of 2 black men and 1 Latino. After one of the locals asked them what they were doing, the group simply scattered. The investigation then involved specially trained dogs to trace the whereabouts of 8-year-old Joshua and the infant. Based on the behavior of the animals, which stopped at roughly the same spot, it was concluded that the children were taken by car to the north of the apartment complex where Deborah lived. According to one of the deceased's sisters, in August of that same year, Laverne told Debbie that he considered himself the father of the unborn child and demanded that she give him the new boy. However, she refused, insisting that the child was James's. The sister also mentioned that just 2 days before the murder, Debbie complained about being stalked by Laverne. He repeatedly ambushed her on the street, insulted her, and tried to provoke a conflict. During this time, Deborah began to worry about her safety and seriously considered obtaining a restraining order, which she later received. Given that they had already had conflicts involving physical violence, Laverne had multiple criminal convictions and was a gang member, he seemed like a likely suspect, especially considering that his son Jordan was the only one who wasn't harmed. Unfortunately, at that time, Laverne couldn't be tracked, so the police attempted to contact his last girlfriend, Cynthia Sawyer. When they arrived at her home, neither the young woman nor the suspect was present. The landlord said he hadn't seen Laverne in a while, but pointed them toward Cynthia, suggesting they could speak with her. He also gave the police access to search the apartment, but it yielded no results. Therefore, the officers immediately set off to find Cynthia. They eventually located her, and she claimed she wasn't involved with the criminal, but kept in touch because they had a child together. She also knew that shortly before these events, Laverne had been imprisoned for drug trafficking. Cynthia shared that, according to Debbie, Laverne wasn't the father of the missing infant, something the deceased had insisted upon. Nevertheless, Laverne was convinced otherwise and was practically obsessed with the child in Debbie's womb. After Deborah's death, Laverne called Cynthia and threatened her, saying she would suffer the same fate as Deborah unless she obeyed him. Cynthia was certain that he was behind the crime. Cynthia mentioned that Laverne might have stayed with a 30-year-old close acquaintance named Laura. She provided a lead on how to find her and also shared information with the police about the family members of the main suspect. This allowed investigators to find a reliable source of information and uncover the true identity of the young man. However, the suspected murderer wasn't there either, but Cynthia provided another address where Laverne might be hiding from the detectives. The next landlord was named Martha Martin. Laverne was her nephew, as she had recently married his uncle. The suspect was not there. Martha allowed the police to search the suspect's room, but once again, nothing significant was found. The people living there couldn't provide any compromising information. Meanwhile, the autopsy of the deceased was carried out. The forensic expert found 6 wounds on Samantha's neck. 5 of them were non-fatal, but the 6th one severed the jugular vein and broke one of the cervical vertebrae. There were numerous defensive wounds on the girl's body. It was believed that she had been killed as a witness. No sexual trauma was found on Samantha's body. An foreign object of small size was discovered. It appeared to have been inserted from behind. Following this, there were signs of damage to the neck area. A cut in the lower abdomen was also noted. Through this hole, the child was removed and the umbilical cord was likely cut with a tool found on the street. This raised the question of whether the child survived after this makeshift barbaric procedure. As forensic experts knew, a fetus can survive no more than 5 minutes after the mother's heart stops. This meant that the killer had to act very clearly, confidently, and quickly. Ideally, this would be done by someone with medical training, but even they would need help. It led to the assumption that the attacker was not working alone. According to criminologists who examined the crime scene, the heroine's heart was still beating when she was cut open and the child was taken. This strengthened the suspicion that there were multiple perpetrators. It would have been impossible to immobilize an adult woman and hold her down to perform such a procedure alone. Ultimately, consulting with experienced experts confirmed these concerns. The murderer wasn't alone. Laverne definitely had help. This brought attention to a group of 2 black men and 1 Latino who had been loitering near the victim's house around the time of the crime. Their description matched Laverne's group. In practice, such crimes are very rare. Usually, a woman is involved in cases where a child is targeted. This is a kind of kidnapping, often when a woman is unable to have children and decides to take someone else's baby. Many questions remain, but it was clear that the criminal intended to preserve the child's life. The fate of 8-year-old Josh was still unknown. Who and why took him and baby Elijah remained a mystery. When the police visited the school where the boy attended and spoke with a social worker, new unpleasant details about Deborah's life emerged. It was suggested that there might have been physical abuse by her new boyfriend, James. There were grounds to believe that James had been abusive toward the woman and the missing schoolboy. After visiting the school, the police were unable to determine where Josh might be, but suspicions again arose that the victim's boyfriend could have been involved in some way. Then, unexpectedly, around noon on November 18th, 1995, a man from a neighboring town, located just 10 minutes away, called the police station. He said that as soon as he saw the missing Josh on the news, he immediately recognized the boy. His girlfriend, Patrice Scott, had been babysitting a child exactly like the boy in the police photo, but by that time, his girlfriend had already taken the child and left. The man explained that on the night of Deborah's murder, a black man and a woman they didn't know knocked on their window. They handed over 8-year-old Josh, saying that someone needed to look after him because his mother had been killed in a shooting related to a bad drug deal. After that, they just ran away, and the next day they came to pick up the boy. This information seemed very interesting, so the detectives hurried to verify it. When they finally managed to meet with Patrice, she confirmed the story. She also described the black man who turned out to be Laverne and his companion, a woman named Jacqueline. From the very beginning, the young woman appeared nervous and said that she had just given birth and couldn't care for the schoolboy. That night, Josh stayed with her. Patrice heard a heartbreaking story from the boy when he woke up screaming. According to him, 4 strangers came to his mother, climbed through the bedroom window, cut open her stomach, killed his sister, and took his unborn brother. Patrice thought it was just a bad dream, but now she understood that it was the terrifying reality the boy had experienced. She said that the next day, Jacqueline and her boyfriend Fidel came and took the boy. Patrice also noticed suspicious stains on Jacqueline's dress that looked like blood. Patrice led the police in the direction the group had gone, using the landscape to guide them as she didn't know the exact address. About 20 minutes later, the police arrived in the town of Maywood nearby. Here, in an alley, they found the lifeless body of the boy, Josh, without reaching Jacqueline's house. When the coroner performed the autopsy, they found identical injuries to those that killed Kirena and her daughter. Naturally, Jacqueline, Laverne, and Fidel could not be found at the address provided by Patrice. They had fled again. The officers then returned to the address where they had last seen the criminal. It was the home of his acquaintance, Laura. Authorities were allowed to search the room of the killer once more, but unfortunately, nothing was found there. Laura told the police about the complicated relationship between the victim and the likely killer. It turned out that when Deborah got along well with Laverne, she admitted that she was pregnant with his child. But when they broke up and she got back together with James, she told a different story. This happened repeatedly, and in the end, Laverne became frustrated with the lies. He harbored a grudge against his ex. Apparently, Deborah did this to keep her latest boyfriend around. Thanks to Laura, the main suspect was tracked down and arrested. During the interrogation, Laverne behaved arrogantly and insisted that he would never harm a child. He also did not confirm the police's suspicions that Jacqueline or her boyfriend Fidel could have been involved in the incident. Reluctantly, the criminal agreed to cooperate with the investigation. He mentioned seeing Jacqueline and Fidel on the day of the murder, but could not say where they were now. While gathering information about other witnesses, Jacqueline's identity was revealed. She was an ordinary girl, and her mother, Martha Martin, had married Laverne's uncle. That's how they became related. However, Jacqueline's life didn't go as planned. She became pregnant at a young age, dropped out of school, had no education, and struggled to find decent work. By the age of 20, she had 3 children, which led her to decide to undergo a procedure to prevent future pregnancies. Jacqueline had a low IQ, which made it difficult for her to find stable employment. Eventually, she turned to petty crime to make ends meet, as welfare benefits weren't enough for her and her children. She was often abused by various boyfriends, which made violence feel normal to her. Her history included multiple arrests and imprisonments. By the time of the events being considered, she was 27 years old. Martha still couldn't understand how her daughter had ended up living such a life. Jacqueline's boyfriend, Fidel, grew up in an even more unstable environment with a mother and grandmother who suffered from paranoia, schizophrenia, and delusional behavior. He was raised in an atmosphere that was genuinely terrifying and incomprehensible to any reasonable person. As a result, Fidel became a typical product of marginalized communities. When his relationship with Jacqueline began, she was manipulative from the start. Additionally, she practiced voodoo to make Fidel completely submit to her. After a couple of rituals, their relationship became even more bizarre. For example, she made him drink her menstrual blood, believing it would give her total control over him. In case of a breakup, she threatened to kill herself. During conflicts, she would behave irrationally. On one occasion, she even ran over one of Fidel's acquaintances with a car, suspecting infidelity. She constantly inflicted harm on herself, such as scratching her face during these episodes. She even stabbed her boyfriend with a knife, but had not killed anyone until then. Despite all of this, she obtained medical training and was allowed to work as a certified nursing assistant. The puzzle started to come together. It became clear how the criminals were able to perform a cesarean section with scissors. One of the perpetrators knew how to do it. Jacqueline no longer wanted to have children, but her new boyfriend, Fidel, was 6 years younger and desperately wanted to become a father. He also wanted to have a lighter-skinned child and asked Jacqueline to fulfill his dream. About a year before the attack, she began claiming that she was pregnant. This seemed strange, given her infertility after the procedure, but she really appeared to be pregnant. Her belly even began to protrude. Jacqueline became close to pregnant women, behaving oddly during this time, shifting her due date, and telling others that doctors had made a mistake, but she still remained close with pregnant friends. Whenever it turned out that one of them was having a girl, Jacqueline immediately lost interest. Everything started to make sense. It seemed that she had long been planning to steal someone else's baby, and she specifically wanted a boy, and one that was light-skinned. The baby, Elijah, who was supposed to be born to Deborah in just a few days, seemed to be the perfect candidate that Laverne had offered Jacqueline. This was likely the motive behind the gruesome act of removing the baby from its mother's womb. When Jacqueline's sister Tina was contacted, she revealed that Jacqueline had recently given birth. She had shared this with the entire family, but by that time, everyone already doubted the truth of her pregnancy and childbirth. It became clear that Jacqueline had been passing off the abducted Elijah as her own child. The baby might still be alive. A warrant for the arrest of the criminals was immediately issued. Officers arrived at the address provided by Jacqueline's sister, but Jacqueline was not at home. A neighbor agreed to let the officers wait for the return of the criminals. Soon after, Jacqueline arrived holding a small child. Fidel was driving, wearing a hoodie that matched the description of the clothing missing from Deborah's home. Jacqueline, now pretending to be the mother, presented a forged birth certificate for the baby and named him Fidel Jr. The child was taken to the hospital for an examination and DNA testing, while Fidel and Jacqueline were arrested. As soon as the news of the arrest spread, Patrice came forward again. She claimed to know more about the events and revealed that the three criminals had disposed of the child as an unwanted witness. She felt she could now tell the truth, as the entire gang had been apprehended. Patrice explained that she had immediately noticed something was off when Joshua was handed over to her. He was wearing a bloody jacket, but he had no shoes or pants. The next day, when Jacqueline returned to pick up Joshua, Patrice questioned her about the suspicious details. Jacqueline reluctantly told Joshua it was time to take his medicine, but the boy insisted that he wasn't taking any medicine. Jacqueline forced him to swallow something, causing him to vomit. Realizing that Joshua could expose them, the gang took him to Jacqueline's house, where they strangled him with an electrical cord in the laundry room. After the boy stopped showing signs of life, Jacqueline inflicted further injuries to his neck and chest before they disposed of him. Amidst the tragic events that had affected the entire family, the news that Elijah was alive became a beacon of hope. Patrice admitted that she had lied to the police during their initial conversation out of fear for her life, as she had been threatened if she told the truth. During the interrogations, Fidel denied everything. Jacqueline tried to justify the appearance of the end by claiming that she had checked into the hospital under a fictitious name because she didn't have insurance, and there, one of the women handed her her son, whom she had abandoned. However, a DNA test revealed that the baby was indeed Deborah's child. All three were charged with first-degree murder of Deborah, Samantha, and Joshua, as well as the kidnapping of Joshua and Elijah under aggravating circumstances. The criminals faced the death penalty. During the investigation, it was discovered how the criminals obtained the weapon. They received the gun through an acquaintance. It was a weapon they intended to use, allegedly for self-defense, to go to a deal involving illegal substances. The number of people involved in the crime was unprecedented. After Elijah was discharged from the hospital, Deborah's father assumed custody of the baby, and also Jordan. The man raised the children on his own. Later, it was proven that Jacqueline had been faking her pregnancy all along and was selecting a victim to kidnap a child. Laverne, who hated his ex, suggested how to carry out the plan. The thug wanted to take revenge on Deborah. Jacqueline needed a child, and Fidel became just a pawn in their hands. On that fateful night, 24-year-old Laverne, along with 28-year-old Jacqueline and 22-year-old Fidel, came to Deborah's apartment. The woman was not afraid and let the group into her apartment. Laverne tried to convince Deborah to give her child to Jacqueline voluntarily in exchange for $2,000, but she refused the offer. This part of the plan seemed implausible because the criminals had no such money. Following the reconstruction of events, Fidel Kefi and his accomplices went to Deborah's apartment with the intention of kidnapping her child. During the incident, they harmed Deborah and then proceeded to the bedroom of her 10-year-old daughter, Samantha. Meanwhile, Jacqueline took the infant, trying to create the illusion that the baby was hers. She did everything possible to calm the baby and bring it to a safe condition. After the baby was ready, the group left the house, taking the baby and Joshua, leaving Jordan alone with the tragic consequences of the incident. The knife used to kill Joshua was later found in Jacqueline's dishwasher. A blood-stained sheet was discovered several blocks from Joshua's body and matched the bedding found in Jacqueline's house. Blood from the victims was found on many items, including meat scissors, a cord, an elastic band, and jackets. DNA testing confirmed that Laverne Ward was the father of both living boys. Jacqueline and Fidel were found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death. Laverne was also found guilty, but the jury deemed that there was not enough evidence for the death penalty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 60 years. However, in 2003, the governor of Illinois commuted the death sentences to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Jacqueline attempted to have her sentence reduced. In a petition from 2012, she wrote that she had reformed and felt she deserved to return to society and reunite with her family, including her 3 children and 6 grandchildren. Jacqueline wrote that she missed the smell of flowers and the embraces of her family. She long maintained that her confession to the murder had been coerced, claiming she was starved and forced to sign a document under duress. Her petition was rejected. All three criminals remain in state prisons to this day and will never be released. If you enjoyed my work, please subscribe to the channel and support this video with a like. Let's discuss this story in the comments. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you and goodbye.